Welcome to episode 3 of Sports and Discourse. I'm your host, Derek Stevenson, and today I want to talk about Paul Pierce a little bit. He had recently made a little head wave where he was kind of throwing a little bit of shade at his former employer, ESPN, and he had made some comments where he had said that he was done with them, and he kind of really didn't like the atmosphere over there. He was saying that he wasn't able to say certain things on the air, and he had to talk about LeBron James all the time. And a lot of people was kind of throwing some hate back towards him, and I think it's kind of where he kind of had turned people off a lot because he kind of always seems to have something negative to say about LeBron James. And I think it stems from the fact that I feel like he just really didn't ever get to get the flowers that he deserved, in his opinion. And when you really think about it, like, how good is Paul Pierce? Like, I wouldn't say he's like top 20 all time, but if we just break it down to like his position, small forward, I think it's fair to say he's a top 15, maybe even top 12 to 15 small forward of all time. And I think sometimes he is a little underappreciated because he comes from that Celtic lore, and the Celtics have so many great players that I think he kind of just gets lost in the sauce a little bit. But he did bring them a championship, and they hadn't had one for a long time, and he kind of brought the Celtics back, turned them into a respectable franchise. When he started his career, they were kind of like on the come up a little bit, and they were kind of like a mid-range team. They were like that 4th or 5th seed consistently in the Eastern Conference, but he could never really get them over the hump. And then they kind of had a big fall off where they was like probably the worst or one of the bottom feeders in the NBA. And then they pulled off that famous move where they brought in Kevin Garnett and Ray Allen, and they had just drafted Rajon Rondo, and they ended up winning the championship. And whenever they assembled that team, some people like to say that was the first big three of the modern era. We know that we've had teams before that were considered super teams and big threes and such, but that was kind of the one that reestablished the whole big three. And they were kind of in LeBron James' way in the early part of LeBron's career. They kind of held him up where he might have could have rose to the top a little bit quicker, but they were kind of there to kind of like step on his team and knock him out. So I think he's always had a extremely fierce rivalry with LeBron James. And I think LeBron James kind of rubs him the wrong way because as some of the older players were kind of like transitioning out of the league or on the back half of their career, Paul Pierce was sort of kind of starting to take off a little bit. He was becoming one of the top players in the NBA. And for the early part of his career, he was averaging well over 20 points a game. And whenever they brought in those other guys, he kind of like sacrificed a little bit of his scoring. He dropped it back down to around 19, 20 a game. But overall, he became a way better player, and he made big shot after big shot after big shot. And he ended up being a 10-time All-Star in a 20-year career. And he really didn't kind of start to decline until he left Boston. He had a stop in Brooklyn where he was kind of just like a role player. And then he went and finished his career as a LA Clipper. And he was kind of just a piece of the puzzle. Like, he really wasn't there to do much but just be a solid role player, which he played his position for the Clippers really well, but he wasn't able to really achieve any more success. But at that one little stretch in time where the Celtics went to the championship like 2 out of 3 years in a row, he was one of the top players in the NBA. And I think that he's always kind of felt like, maybe LeBron James might have came in and stole some of his shine, And therefore, I feel like he's always kind of like looked at LeBron James like he kind of might have took some of the credit that maybe he deserved from him. But honestly, LeBron James is an absolute better player than him, and he's not even in the same conversation as LeBron. But I feel like we always kind of leave Paul Pierce out when we talk about great players, and he does really deserve to be mentioned among the greats. Like, he definitely, he was a perennial all-star. Like, he was a solid defender. I mean, he was a good leader on the court. He was tough. He was like a big moment type of player. Like, if he's in the game and, it's clutch time, you could always look to him. He could hit a big jump shot. He definitely gonna knock down some clutch free throws. He gonna play tough D. Like, he was a real, like, I don't know if we could go to superstar, but he was about as close to being a superstar as you could probably get without actually like being recognized as one. So I feel like he's always kind of had a little bit of disdain towards LeBron, and maybe it's not really fair, but I could see where it's probably frustrating because at the end of the day, when you work for ESPN, their number one goal is ratings. So if you really look at the scope of things in most sports broadcasting now, the focus is always LeBron James. Like, a lot of people, it rubs them the wrong way as far as like, I would say they get sick of hearing about LeBron James. A lot of people, it's just LeBron every day. But I understand why ESPN pushes it, because their most popular shows, the most popular broadcasters that they hire, like ESPN is low key created a couple of, like, I don't know if I would call them star broadcasters, but they've gave a couple of guys some decent careers behind just them driving home the LeBron James like conversation. Like, you could look at Nick Wright, Kendrick Perkins, just a couple of other dudes like that just all they do is talk about LeBron James all day long. Shannon Sharp, he's not with ESPN, but him and Skip, they talk about LeBron James constantly. And that's just kind of the popular topic, and it always is. And at the end of the day, like, the sports networks, that's what they want. They want ratings. They want people tuned in. And the best way to get them is to talk about LeBron James. And unfortunately, until that man retires, that's just probably what we're going to always get. So I just want to, like, ask a question. Do you guys get sick of the LeBron James effect? Would you rather people just forget about LeBron James for a little while? Like, or do you mind it at all? Like, me personally, I don't really mind talking about it, because I just know as long as he's a popular athlete, he's going to be the topic of conversation, and it doesn't really bother me, even though it is football season. And I think eventually the football narratives are going to take over the forefront for a little while. But as soon as it gets back to basketball season, it's going to be LeBron James all day, every day. And that's just going to be the way it is. But anyways, do you guys think Paul Pierce is tripping? Like, was he really done with ESPN, or was he just hurt that they fired him? Like, is he fair with his criticism of LeBron James, or does he be talking nonsense? Like, I know at one point he had made some comments where he was saying that, like, he had a better career than Dwayne Wade, which I think universally most people would say no. Even me personally, I would say no, and I like Paul Pierce a lot. And then he also said that, like, he's a better shooter than Klay Thompson. And I think probably 100% of the people that's not Paul Pierce would say, bruh, you tripping. You nowhere near as good of a shooter as Klay Thompson. But that's not even a knock, because you can be an excellent shooter and still be nowhere near as good as Klay Thompson. It's only been probably a handful of people that could realistically say they're as good as Klay Thompson. I don't even know if it's really a bunch that could really definitively say they're better, but it might be a handful of guys, maybe like 5 to 10, that maybe could say they're as good as Klay, but I don't think Paul Pierce is one of them. But anyways, man, just let me know what y'all think. Is Paul Pierce tripping? Is he bitter, or does he have a point? All right, thank you.